Wildwood.
If he has the luck I do in his first game in 2 years, he would get rained out.
Yeah, wonderful.
I think it's just where you are, because on my way home, there were spots where there was no rain, and then there were spots where it was just pouring.
Yeah. And it's not raining now at all. It actually is kind of brightened up a little bit.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Joe.
Up, guys.
I know Dan's not going to be here, so I think we're all present. Is that correct?
7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You got 7.
Okay, we're good to go then. So welcome to the City of Wildwood Council Planning and Parks Committee for May the 18th. And we have, it looks like 9 items ready for action in tonight's agenda. And the first order of business is roll call.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here,
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher, Councilmember Galani,
Here.
and Chair McCutcheon.
Here. So Joe, you take over at this point?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the committee, as part of the packet for tonight's meeting, the Department of Planning provided to you the policy City Council adopted for the election of committee chairs at the first available meeting after the April election is certified and the mayor makes new appointees to the committee. The policy is fairly detailed, as you saw. And so from the perspective of Mr. Cross and I, what we would like to do is accept nominations from the floor for chair for the upcoming committee year 2021-2022. We'll accept nominations and then vote on those nominations in order of their receipt. So with that, committee members, would someone like to make a nomination for chair? Ms. Clark.
Yes, I think that Chair McCutcheon has done a fine job. She has a lot of experience. She knows the rules and regulations well. She's had 11 years experience on the council, very dedicated and open to positive criticism and willing to change if there's anything that we wish to have changed. So I would nominate Chair McCutcheon.
Committee members, is there a second to Ms. Clark's motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilmember Giuliani. Are there any other nominations from the floor? Dr. Rambo.
Yeah, Don Bartoni is also interested in this chair, and so I'm nominating him.
Thank you, Dr. Rambo. Is there a second to Dr. Rambo's motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councilmember Farmer. Following the policy, we'll vote on the first nomination. Mr. Cruz, would you do a roll call vote of the members for Ms. McCutcheon as chair?
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
no.
Councilmember Nyan,
May I just go on record that I do not like doing this? No.
Councilmember Farmer,
No.
Same as me.
Councilmember Rambo, think he's froze.
He's frozen.
Mhm.
You might want to come back to him.
I'll move on and come back to him. Councilmember Flasher,
Not here.
Councilmember Giuliani,
Yes.
and Chair
With your-
McCutcheon.
Yes.
With all yours permission, we'll see if Dr. Rambo comes back on. Travis, do you see him?
He just sent me a text. He is froze and he is trying to get reconnected right now.
With your permission, if we could just wait a second or two.
Right.
Thank you. The reason I think it's important to wait as well is if you were keeping count, I think the
It's a
vote is
tie.
3-3.
It is. So his vote is extremely important.
I think that's why Dan is at the Cardinals game. Why didn't I think to go to the Cardinals game?
I asked him if he had extra tickets.
Well, Miss Diane, you have the color on for the game.
Yep.
Yeah. Does anybody know who's playing?
The Cardinals.
Yeah, I
You
think
know
it's
that.
I think they're playing the Pirates.
The Pirates. Okay.
Typically, that's a win.
Is it still raining or are they playing?
I think he's come here.
Well, I'm trying. That was an inopportune time for sure. So what do we have here?
Dr. Rambo, the tally of votes so far is 3 in favor of Ms. McCutcheon, 3 in favor of Mr. Bartoni, and you will break the tie.
Okay, I vote for Don Bartoni. I
So
think
that
Deb has done a perfectly adequate job as the chair, but we have a philosophical difference in terms of one's ward versus the entire city. And that's the reason for my vote.
So you're voting no for Ms. McCutcheon.
That's right.
That motion fails by a vote of 3-4. The other nominee and the motion that has been placed on the floor is for Mr. Bartoni as chair. Mr. Cruz, would you conduct a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Clark,
Teresa, you were muted.
So you explain this vote to me.
The
If
motion,
it, if it's a, Don's our only other one, so we
Wouldn't he
still vote.
automatically win?
no, we need to do the vote.
Okay. Okay, yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
I'll abstain.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
We're voting on Mr. Bartoni, correct? So Mr. Galani, you voted for both of us?
Well, the other motion already failed. So Councilmember Clark voted for you on the first one and then voted for Don on this one. So I guess that's why she asked the question, which I wanted to clarify too. I assume if we voted on the first motion for Councilmember McCutcheon and that failed, wouldn't that not automatically make Councilmember Bartoni the chair? I'm confused as to why we're voting twice. I just figured if the first motion was already failed, so Ms. McCutcheon couldn't win, then I would support this motion that if that was an inevitable outcome regardless.
Councilmember Giuliani, Mr. Cross and I talked to John Young this morning in the event we had something occur like this, because it's been a while. Ms. McCutcheon's been the chair for 2 years, and he basically said you have to vote it on through. At least that's how I interpreted it. Mr. Cross, is that-
Mr. Vunich, actually, he kind of said something a little bit different, at least as I understand it. Other municipalities, when there are 2 or more names put forth, let's say it's 2, in this case, it's 2, after the first vote, if it is in favor of that person, based on the committee members that are on the call, that's the end of the vote. There is no second vote. So Ms. Clark and Mr. Galani, you're both are correct that the first, if the vote was 3-4, where Ms. McCutcheon's, there were 3 for, and then 3 for 3 yeses and 4 no's, then automatically it goes to Mr. Bartoni. There is no need for a second vote.
Yeah, that's what I was under the assumption. I thought this was just a formality where, we would all vote yes regardless, since it was a
Mr.
foregone
Young, Mr.
conclusion.
Young told us that that's the way it's done in other municipalities. We could continue and do it the way we have done in the past, or if we wanted, you do the first vote, and if it's in favor of or against, there really is no need for a second vote.
Correct.
Well, without a second vote, you're assuming everybody supports the candidate, which with a close vote is maybe not the case. I don't know.
Okay, I think we can do it either way. And if we want, we could just do a second vote, which then is independent of the first one, because that first motion failed. And so you start with a clean slate. And that's what Mr. Vunich was doing, and that's perfectly fine and logical.
But I guess the question I have then, though, is if the first motion was for Councilmember McCutcheon to be chair and that motion failed, it's off the table. And the second motion is for Councilmember Bartoni to be chair. What if it failed also? It's impossible that it would by virtue of math, but I'm just saying hypothetically, based on what you're saying, what if somebody changed their vote from the first round to the second round and we were stuck with 2 motions for the only 2 candidates and they both failed?
Well, if they both failed, then our options are potentially you could repeat the process and call for names. But the other option, if, for instance, if it were a tie, or if both motions failed, then the current chair would remain until the next meeting, and this would come before the committee again for nominations and ultimately a vote. If Mr. Galani, if both were to fail, or in fact there were a tie.
So did I hear somebody abstain?
Mr.
Councilmember
Bartoni,
Bartoni abstained against himself.
So if he abstained, then what is the count?
it's 5-1, 5-4
From the
with 1
original?
abstention. Pardon?
We go by the second vote.
Well, again, I'm not trying to argue the point here, but with a failed motion on the first nominee, there is a second motion on the floor, but there's just a first and second. There is not a majority vote. I don't know how that motion can be approved without an action.
I mean, yeah, I guess we're arguing a moot point more or less. It's unless the original, it's basically doing the same vote over, so the outcome is going to be the same. So the way I saw it is that we're voting for the foregone conclusion, so might as well make it unanimous, is what my methodology was.
Well, yeah, that's what I was understanding also, that we voted, it didn't pass. I voted for Ms. McCutcheon. It didn't pass, so that's that's done. Now this is a whole different thing. Now Now, who do we have? We have Don, he's running for it. And so now that's all we have left. It doesn't have to do with Ms. McCutcheon at all, right, Joe? And so now we just focus on that. So if we vote yes again, it just means that we accept him because we don't have another candidate at this point. Is that right?
At this point, so we would conclude, we would vote out the motion, and if it was a tie, as Mr. Cross mentioned, or a similar vote, 3-4, then we would accept nominations from the floor again. If there are none, then Ms. McCutcheon would be the acting chair until the next meeting.
So if the current vote is 5-1, I guess with one abstention, so everyone has voted at this point.
Well, it's 5 with 1 abstention.
Okay, so we're
Dr.
missing one vote then.
Dr. Rambo is the
So-
missing vote.
So if I may, please, like, if you open up the attachment to this, and maybe this will help clarify things. It sounds to me like, or at least it reads to me, I guess I should say, that we would have, in this case, the 2 nominees, and then we would just go around the table, so to speak, and like each person would say which person they are voting for. So we would just, Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, so to speak, and then we, say one person or the other, and then once we finish all everybody that's in attendance voting, then we have one person or another.
Mr. Young discouraged that this morning.
Okay. Did he give a reason for that? I mean, I didn't talk to him. I'm not arguing with him. I'm just kind of curious, just because I know other committees have done it that way in the past. And
Yeah.
did he have a reason for that?
It follows Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay. All right. Well, fair enough.
Well, so congratulations, Don. And
And we need-
what?
We need to.
No, I didn't
conclude
say
the
anything. I
vote.
just kind of chuckled.
I guess Rob's still got to vote.
Yes. Gary,
Oh,
please
I thought I
complete the roll
did.
call.
He already voted. I need Councilmember McCutcheon to vote. That's all I need.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
But I do congratulate you, Don.
Okay.
Thank you, Deborah. And I appreciate it. I think you have done a great job. I think Teresa said some very nice things that were very accurate about you previously. This is definitely my my desire to do this is definitely not a reflection of your leadership or your qualifications, that's for sure. So I guess, do I just take the reins at this point?
Yes.
Okay. So that brings us, and I'm probably going to stumble through this a little bit, but that brings us to approval of minutes. Do I have a motion? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting? Have a motion from Councilmember Galani. We need a second. Second from Councilmember Nyan. Is there any discussion on the motion? Teresa, you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. On page 2 of the minutes, and I could be totally wrong on this, but I believe that the public comment on number 3 was made by a Mr. Hudson, Hutson, instead of Hudson. That may be wrong, but I believe his name is Hudson. And on page 4, the second is not listed by Mr. Bartoni, Councilmember Bartoni, under the Wilson Hydro vote. It just lists that it was, the motion was made, and I don't see that it was seconded, but I think it was seconded by Don.
I think you're right about that, Teresa. I'm not 100% sure, and I'm going to take your word for the spelling of Mr. Hudson's name. But I'm sure the department can verify both of those for us. Is there and I was just gonna say, would we be okay approving the minutes with just those corrections getting made?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstained?
I'll abstain.
Councilmember Farmer is abstaining. Okay, that brings us to our action items, and under planning matters, we have 3 items ready for consideration. The first being the zoning ordinance for noise code for constant emitters of noise. Joe?
Mr. Bartoni, before we move to the action items under planning, we have public comment.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I went a little bit too quick there. Do we have any, there's nobody on the screen, but Mr. Cruz, do we have anybody, or Mr. Newberry, do we have anybody out there waiting for public comment?
I
Mr.
have
Chair,
no one.
Mr. Chair, I'll address that on the Zoom call. We do have several in attendance, and Ms. Fisher has raised her hand.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize, Ms. Fisher. I was definitely not trying to skip you. So Travis, if you can move her over, and
She's on her way in.
okay, Mrs. Fisher, you are ready.
All right, thank you. And you're looking quite sporty in that Hawaiian shirt, Mr. Bartoni.
So I will kind of confess here. I had shoulder surgery a couple weeks ago. I am
Okay.
very limited on what I can wear.
No,
So
I think you should all dress that way, actually. That's
I
just
have-
my own opinion.
Okay, I have to wear button shirts and short sleeve, and I don't have a whole wardrobe full of those.
I will not take up much of your time. Again, I'm Nancy Fisher. My husband Dan and I live at 2066 Wild Horse Creek Road. Obviously, this is about the noise issue. We wanted to thank you for holding off on sending the CUP revision to council until after the testing is confirmed and completed. We really appreciate that. And our only other request is that Dr. Thunder be encouraged to test with all the motors running at capacity. While we understand, as little as I understand about noise testing, that he can test 1 or 2 motors and extrapolate the results, we are fairly certain he absolutely can't extrapolate that all the motors have been replaced or modified without them all being on during the testing. So that is really our only request, and we wanted to thank you again, and we really look forward that hopefully this is getting resolved once and for all. So thank you.
Mr. Bartoni, you are on mute.
So thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Travis, do we have anybody else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Garetano is in attendance. Give me a moment. And Councilmember Garetano is on his way in.
Okay,
Hi there.
Mr. Garetano, you are up.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, for the record, yep, Joe Garetano, Ward 8. So after that vote, I really don't miss all the excitement of the meeting that Planning and Parks has. That was quite a vote there. But congratulations to Don. And I see that the Hawaiian shirt trend will be something new for Planning and Parks. Maybe we have a Hawaiian night. And also, appreciation to Deborah for all her work, being chair, for her work. And, we know you've done a good job. So congratulations to the new committee. But anyway, I'm here to speak. Just a quick reminder, because Dan is not here, and I know he's super passionate about one of the topics, which is the hard courts, and I am as well. But just again, to reiterate how it is a need that we keep hearing more and more from our residents. And, we've got residents that are going and using courts in other cities. It appeals to an age group that right now, is looking for more things to do. And so, as you look at that, I think that, some of the options being presented, whether it be the community park, these are, I think, quick wins, low hanging fruit. If the terrain is available and it's flat, hopefully we can turn something around like that. So just wanted to mention that. I know Dan would have liked to have been here, but he's watching the game tonight on his birthday. So that's all I've got. But yeah, miss you all, and I'll watch the meeting now. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Travis, do we have anyone else wanting to speak?
Mr. Chair, no one who's in attendance on Zoom has indicated that they would wish to speak.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we can go to the action items and the planning matters. We have the 3 items, and the first one being the noise code of constant emitters. So I will pass it back over to Joe. Thank you for catching me earlier.
Well, you're welcome. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the first item for consideration relates to the noise code and possible changes to it along with the zoning ordinance. As you know, this particular topic has been discussed for many months by the committee. And over those months, we've had the support of the aquaculture facility as well as the operator, and then the consultants the city has engaged to assist in this matter. The consultants had hoped to be in town sometime in early May. Obviously, that's not occurred. And so the department contacted them to receive an updated schedule relative to their studies, both at the aquaculture operation on Wild Horse Creek Road, but equally important, the corridor study relative to Route 100, Route 109, and other locations in the vicinity, and to determine the levels of noise associated with those traffic areas. The revised timeframe now, for the most part, is June 7th, the week of June 7th, weather permitting. And so I just wanted to update you on that. The consultants still believe that even with the delayed start, they will have something by midsummer, which was the goal previously as well. So hopefully weather will cooperate. They'll be in town on June 7th. And there has been a request that, at least for the corridor analysis, that the consultant take time to meet with several of the residents in the vicinity of the corridor, so as they could hear firsthand what they're experiencing and use that as empirical evidence as they fine-tune the model that will produce much of the information that'll be presented to the committee. So the week of June 7th, keep your fingers crossed for good weather. And if there are any questions, the department would be glad to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Joe. Councilmember Clark.
Just a quick question, Joe. In addition to what Ms. Fisher was talking about, do we have a way, a documentation or something that, a way to show that the motors have been changed and we are not, but we don't have any of the old motors? Because if we only had like half of the motors changed and those were the only ones that were going, I understand that the noise level would be essentially the same as if all of them had been changed and they were all going. But if one was still an old motor or not the one that we approved, we would, the data would be inconclusive. So do we have any documentation showing that?
Well, other than the email that Mr. Lisk provided that acknowledged that all of the older equipment had been replaced with newer equipment that is much quieter and doesn't emit the discrete tone that's been problematic with the others. No, we don't. Obviously, the verification of the change is a critical component of the consultant's visit. They were on site with Mr. Lisk and saw the equipment that's in place. Obviously, we need to get back on site with Mr. Lisk so we can verify that the old equipment is gone and it's all new. And obviously, I'll defer to Dr. Thunder and his son to ensure that they do the analysis consistent with good practice. And so if it is all of the motors on, then that's what I'm sure they'll do. If it's not, I'm sure they'll have a reason why. But Dr. Thunder has said if the access is denied, they can still get a pretty good idea of what's going on out there from adjoining properties and using mathematical formulas to extrapolate what that all means. So we're going to proceed forward and do our best, but it's all contingent on Mr. Lisk allowing us on the site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody, excuse me, anybody else have any questions for Joe? Okay, so Joe, are you looking for any action today, or this is more just like an update or an FYI? We don't need any motion or anything like that today, correct?
No, sir, no action today, but I wanted to let you know that the original timeline that had been published and presented to the committee was not going to be met, but we've tried to get it on track as quick as possible. And so we're about a month behind, but we hope we can catch up.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Tracy.
I just had a question. So when we thought it was going to be done earlier in May, was Mr. Lisk contacted, and had he previously agreed to let them on the property, or has he been contacted about this new date? I just wondered if you have a feel for the chances of that happening.
I did contact Mr. Lisk after the last committee meeting, noting that it would be essential for us to have access. I never heard back from him. So Ms. Nyan, I'll be starting over again, and hopefully we'll convince Mr. Lisk, who's been cooperative up to this point, that access is just in everyone's best interest, including his.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. So we'll go to our next item under action items, the overview of planned areas of study for the update of the Chapter 410 Tree Preservation and Restoration Code. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this item 2 is more of an update of a matter that's been before the committee in the past. As you know, we have a tree preservation and restoration code. It is a set of regulations that stipulate what can happen on a property, both pre-development, during development, and post-development in terms of tree removals, timber sales, preservation of grand trees, etc. The ordinance was one of the original approved by the city of Wildwood in 1996. Along with that, a landscape manual was also adopted at that time. Years later, a sustainable planning's guide was added, and collectively that creates the network of requirements relating to trees, plantings, removal, and additions. Obviously, 1996 is a very long time ago, and the landscape manual has not been updated. And other than an action in 2017 for grand trees, the tree preservation and restoration code regulations have not been reviewed regularly. The committee believed it was imperative to do such. And since that time, Dr. Rambo, city team members, and others have been reviewing the documents to create the framework for its review and update. Tonight, the department is providing you that framework, and there's 4 major components, so to speak. First and foremost are the regulations themselves. Second, the landscape manual. Third, the sustainable planning's guide. And then finally, a category of resources/other. And the resources are those agencies and individuals we'll contact to assist in kind of testing what we're proposing, reviewing what we have, and offering comments on both. Tonight, the department is presenting it to the committee, part 2 of update you. And then secondly, if you have thoughts, this would be a great opportunity over the next week or so to provide those to the department. That way, those thoughts or suggestions can be put into the list. And then the list will be the action items that the Planning and Zoning Commission will review at a future work session as we proceed forward and make recommendations regarding this particular set of items. So tonight, Dr. Rambo, Mr. Newberry, and I are available for questions about the categories or the components. And then if you have any thoughts or suggestions, we'd be glad to accept them and write them down and give them all due process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Does anybody have anything they want to say? I see Teresa. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to thank the department and Dr. Rambo for putting this together. I know that you've worked long hours on all of you to put this together and come up with a good tree preservation plan for us. I just want to tell you, I appreciate that because the trees are very important to us as a city.
Thank you, Teresa. Anybody else have anything? Dr. Rambo, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly, I'm trying to be a worker bee here. Joe and Travis have done great work already, and I'm trying to support that effort. I would encourage you guys to look at the existing documents, particularly the sustainable planning guides. It's quite comprehensive. It just has some mistakes in it, and there's some good stuff that we have already. And so part of this effort at the end of it ought to be to publicize what we have and make it known to the community. And we would be way ahead if folks have had places to look for. As one example, today on Nextdoor, it was raining, and so I spent a little more time sitting at my desk than I usually do. And there was someone that asked about EAB, Emerald Ash Borer, and there were 37 comments, and each one of them was favorable to the kind of treatment that we're using, which is highly toxic to pollinators, butterflies, bees, those kinds of things. And the trees are going to die anyway. And so, if we had resources out there that were, easily accessible to the general public, or that they knew, that we have a repository and just go look on the website, it would be, we would be way ahead. So that starts with us. And so if you guys, get a few minutes, I suggest that you go look at at those documents. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Anyone else have anything? So the only thing I will add is this seems to have been a lot of work done in a fairly short amount of time. So thank you very much for everybody that is involved in this. And this is going to be a great benefit to the city and all of our residents. So similar to the previous one, I think you explained this, Joe. We're not looking for any action tonight. This is just updating us on where we're at, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. And again, if after tonight, over the next week or two, you think of things that you want us to investigate, us being the Department of Planning and Parks, the Department of Public Works, Dr. Rambo and the Planning and Zoning Commission, we'd be more than glad to do that. So please don't hesitate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure we all will. Our next item under action items for planning matters is the watershed erosion matter for 2428 Evergreen Forest Court in Ward 5. Joe, this is for you also.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, you may be wondering why a particular property is being identified as an agenda item tonight. There is a logic to this, and it's symptomatic, I think, of what's occurring in Wildwood. Problems along certain areas of our mainline channel creeks, and those are affecting private properties to a degree that they present risk to public health, safety, and welfare. In those instances, obviously, the Watershed Erosion Task Force has wanted to provide support to those private property owners as well as to the public lands that are under the ownership of the city of Wildwood. In this particular case, it's a prime example of hopefully a cooperative effort between the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, the city of Wildwood, and the private property owner. In this instance, we were successful in having the district visit the site on several occasions, meet with the consultant team that the city has formed for the Watershed Erosion Task Force, and have them investigate what solutions might exist, and most importantly, if the district could fund them. Tonight, you received a letter from the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District that for the most part says there's nothing they can do at this time. And again, I say it's symptomatic because until the district, according to that entity, has a funding source for watershed, erosion, and other problems with stormwater, they will not be able to basically help in much regard. And so as part of the memorandum, the department has identified some steps that it believes we need to consider in the future as part of our effort to address erosion problems, both public and private. And obviously, the suggestions are just that. They're for conversation, for discussion. Ultimately, if the committee has ones they'd like to add, ones they'd like to delete or modify, then certainly that could be accomplished and be done with much appreciation. However, we want to look at these situations public and private erosion areas, not in the context of a single point or maybe even a single lot. What we're finding is that the district can act if there's a threatened sanitary sewer line, manhole, or other improvement of the district. And so from this point forward, I think it's in the best interest of the city to consider all of those problems in that context. The start of the project and the end of the project should include something that belongs to MSD. Let them tell us it's not appropriate, but we should never just pinpoint a location and anticipate that it will be favorably reviewed and funded. And so that's first and foremost. I think we as the city should consider offering assistance to private property owners, at least as an advocate to the district and anybody that would listen. And that could include some engineering work like we did in this particular case, having the consultant visit it, basically prioritize it, and let us know if we have time, if we don't have time, and what would be logical steps to address it. We also need to continue to encourage the Watershed Erosion Task Force to find funding sources. They're critical to this success. As the city council, at the time we do our budgets in the fall and early winter of each year, you should expect from the Department of Planning and the Department of Public Works us advocating for additional funding going toward watershed erosion issues. And that could be through our existing capital improvements, sales tax. Certainly, the Watershed Erosion Task Force will be sending you a lot of information here shortly on its public education plan, its prioritized locations, and hopefully alternative funding options. And so we hope that when they do arrive to you, the committee and others on city council will see them in a favorable light. And then finally, probably the most controversial aspect is if MSD, the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, does submit to the residents of Wildwood and others in its jurisdiction a stormwater, an impervious stormwater tax, it may be in our best interest to spend a lot of time analyzing it and seeing the benefits it might derive for our residents. So saying all of that, this is, again, just an example of what we're facing as a city council, and the Watershed Erosion Task Force. And hopefully some of these ideas are ones that you could support as we move forward. But right now, this particular instance, we don't have a good solution, and we certainly have to find one to help the private property owner. I'm not advocating spending city taxpayer dollars, but there's a lot of things the city can do, I think, to help. Mr. Chair, if there's any questions regarding this particular situation or the 6 items that have been identified in the memorandum, the department would be glad to address them at this time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joe. And this is one of the 9 items that the council approved previously to get basically the bids and the work to see what it's going to take, I guess, financially to fix this issue, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Deborah, you got your hand up first, I see. Go ahead.
First off, I want to thank Joe for all the time and effort he's put into the Watershed Erosion Task Force. And also want to point out that this particular instance, this property, this site was one of the 9 priorities, but it was a priority that was established by the Watershed Erosion Task Force, not a property that was put forth by one individual. So I'd like to make that very clear. And again, I think this was important because in an instance that we can use for a pattern, we now have had a greater discussion with MSD and the other powers that be, so that we now know how to approach it. We tried the approach of the storm lines that goes on both sides of the property, to hoping that would tie into helping this homeowner get some relief. It did not work in this instance, but I think, as Mr. Booney just said, I think that's something to keep foremost in our mind, so that at some point, hopefully it will work and we can help another property owner. Thank you.
I want to just keep my mute off. Thank you, Deborah. Teresa, go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I guess in the interest of engineering practices and the efficaciousness of time and money and environment, the top 9 that Deborah was talking about, the top 9, well, actually there were top 8. The 9th one wasn't really a critical issue specific, but those top problems were identified by our experts, and these experts, they used a massive amount of data and experience, and they pointed out these areas that had the most significant and serious damage and needed the most attention. And the department, Joe just pointed out that for private property, our attention is limited. So that's one of our objectives, or one of the objectives of the Watershed Erosion Task Force Education Subcommittee. That subcommittee that's led by Carol Holthouse is developing a simple presentation to give, as well as a more detailed erosion prevention, remediation, and maintenance information for the residents, to help them identify their problems and know the proper action to take depending on the problem that they have, and learn how to maintain their property against more erosion. So these 8 issues are not the most critically overarching ones that I think we should be focusing on. Continuing to put new patches on old worn out bridges doesn't give us new bridges. It just gives us more patches we need to put on. So what I mean is that if we don't identify the root cause of each of these 8 issues by logical analysis, we just keep putting on new patches onto old problems. So if we do this root cause analysis and determine the best practice for implementing a new infrastructure or remediation of the existing one, or and how to maintain a quality watershed system, then, and of course the cost and timing has to be identified to determine the right path that we would take. So what I'm saying is these two paths have to be done at the same time. We have to rectify or address the immediate issues that are those 8 or 9 issues. But if we don't focus also on the bigger issue, which is the root cause of those, we'll continue to have these critical issues happen. So we have to, at the same time, even if we have to just stop what's happening at, or help to stop what's happening at the critical issues, we have to, at the same time, be working on the root cause so it doesn't keep occurring. And if we keep putting all of our money into, let's just work on these issues, we're never going to stop it. So I guess from my point of view, we need to understand what is there before we can know how much money we need for it. And then we move forward with getting funding after we know how much we need. But we need to focus on the root cause as primary and these critical issues as derivative.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, I think the challenge, not just for this committee, but for our council, and Joe kind of alluded to this, is walking that delicate line of trying to help residents without using taxpayer money, because unfortunately the city has a lot more than just this one piece of property that's in an individual's backyard that needs some TLC. But looking forward to seeing what our Watershed Task Force can do and what kind of solutions that they can bring us. So that brings us to park matters. We have 5 items for consideration. The first one being a selection of a park design consultant for the Bluff View Park Improvements, Ward 6. Joe?
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, before I begin the presentation on the memorandum, I'd like to do a little shout out to Mr. Cruz. Bluffview Park, the project, is primarily underway because he was successful in obtaining a $525,000 grant from the Municipal Park Grant Commission. So without that, we would not be here tonight talking about it. So I do want to acknowledge Mr. Cruz's grant writing abilities. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, just as explained, the Department of Planning and Parks in the middle of 2020 submitted a resolution to City Council endorsing the participation of our grant application in the Municipal Park Grant Commission process. The project is Bluffview Park. It was opened in 2015, and for the most part, it was a road building construction project because there was no access to the 100 acres. And to gain access to the 100 acres, it required a substantial retaining wall be constructed to basically support the road. At the terminus of the road is a looped area of parking. And for the most part, after that, it is a system of natural surface trails that provide access to almost the entire 100 acres of the property. Key amongst the assets on this park property is the overlook down onto the Merrimack River and the Crescent Valley. As part of the memorandum, I took the liberty to kind of give you an idea of what that overlook offers in terms of a scenic vista. And certainly if you've not visited it, I would encourage you to do so. As part of the grant preparation, the Municipal Park Grant Commission requires 2 key issues, or 2 key items. One is a concept plan that, for the most part, indicates what the city is proposing. And then secondly, a very preliminary cost estimate. The firm TerraSpec was the original park designer for the Bluffview Park when it was opened. And so Gary and I went to Mr. Keitel of TerraSpec and asked him to put together that concept plan. And that was done for several reasons. First and foremost, Mr. Keitel's knowledge of the property. Secondly, he had all of the data already keyed into his CAD system. And thirdly, he was available and could do it in a fairly quick turnaround. So as part of the memorandum, you can see the concept plans along with some computerized renderings of what the areas would look like, along with the preliminary cost estimate. Those items were submitted with Mr. Cruz's application, and those are the items that help approve the grant. We're at that stage now where we need to begin the design and engineering to create the bid specifications, and so that the project can go out to bid. The Municipal Park Grant Commission has funded the $525,000 for this year, but have advised us that given COVID-19, they will automatically extend it through 2022. This was acknowledged when the capital improvements budget was modified near the end of last year as part of the concerns relating to the pandemic. The department would like to engage Mr. Keitel to complete the design and engineering drawings along with the bid specifications. Primarily for the same reasons we asked Mr. Keitel to do the concept plan and preliminary cost estimate. He has the information in his CAD system. He is available and for all intents and purposes knows the park site as well as anyone. So tonight, the department is requesting authorization to engage TerraSpec into developing a scope of work and cost estimate for those services, and then bring that information back to the Planning and Parks Committee in June for final action. I would note that we have not offered to do other cost or other analysis of firms. I note in the memorandum, we did a fairly lengthy process for an RF, a request for proposals for the Route 66 roadside park. 10 firms responded, one of which was TerraSpec. We got a good feel for what was out there in terms of consultants. And again, based upon what I think is the cost savings using TerraSpec, we'd like to proceed forward and begin those negotiations. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody want to make a motion or have any questions or comments for Joe? Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I have a question, Joe. So this this estimate that we got from TerraSpec, you said we're going to get bids from them. Is this what they came up with? I mean, I look at it and I think, okay, 525,000, and then we've got 75,000 to put into it, so that's 600,000, and then this bid is for 749,000. Is it something they can come down to our 600,000?
Well, actually, as part of the 2020 budget, the department had initially included as part of the capital improvements. Let me rephrase that. As part of the 2020 budget process for fiscal year 2021, the department had $200,000 as a line item. Given concerns about COVID-19, that was reduced to $75,000, which was intended to be used for the design and engineering component. Next year, fiscal year 2022, the department will ask for whatever the difference might be between the 75,000 we've used for the soft cost, the 525,000 available through the grant to basically address the bid process. What this is a cost estimate. We're not sure if it's going to come in low, come in high, or right on target. And as you know, with COVID-19, the price of materials has shot through the roof. So we'll do our best to basically address it as we can. So really what the department is requesting tonight, again, is the authorization to basically negotiate with TerraSpec on the cost for the design and engineering drawings and bid specifications. Thereafter, once we have those, we'll go through the bid process established by code here in the city of Wildwood. And hopefully we'll have a good response and we'll get good prices like we have in the past.
Thank you.
So,
Teresa, did you have a follow-up? Yeah.
I do have a follow-up on that. So I'm sorry, I'm not a budget person, so I be patient with me. If they can't come up with the 600,000, then as I understood it, we took the 125,000 and put that into Watershed Erosion for them to use. And so it's gone, but so we have 75,000 as of now. We don't know what we'll have next year for sure. And is this on our 5-year priority list high enough to have something over what we've got budgeted?
Well, I'll defer to Mr. Cross, who's been managing the strategic planning process. And Mr. Cross, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. So, Ms. Clark, first of all, if I can clarify the numbers, what Mr. Vunich is saying is that the original $200,000 that was in the original budget for 2021, 125,000 was redeployed for the watershed, leaving 75 in the budget for the parks. That combined with the $525,000 grant is $600,000. If we want to call that the proposal at 750,000 would leave $150,000 to be covered by funds generated by the city sometime in the future. So that clarifies the numbers. With regards to the strategic plan, your specific question was, is this high enough in the list of priorities to spend $150,000? The short answer to that is no, it is not. The top 3 priorities are internet, additional funding sources for the city, and watershed. Parks and expansion of parks and so forth is pretty far down the line.
So Tracy, I got you, but I have a question first here. So we have 3 people not on video. Mr. Cross, are we still under a quorum or do we need to take a break? Oh, we got 1 back. We got 2 back. We're good. So Tracy, you are next.
Sorry, I was just talking to kids.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Is it a condition of receiving the grant that we have to do all of these things listed, or can we receive the grant and do what's budgeted and then into the future add on some of these things at a later date?
Generally speaking, we are required as part of the grant to identify the intended improvements. Can we modify those? Certainly. But there may be a reduction in the grant depending on how the Park Grant Commission Board would review the application. And so certainly we would have not have proceeded forward back in August of 2020 with the resolution, knowing that there was a chance that it would not be funded. It's not fair to the Park Grant Commission nor to City Council. But again, the resolution was approved and we do have the grant. That doesn't mean we have to proceed forward with the project. But as part of the strategic planning process on the spreadsheet, Mr. Cross has made an emphasis on us identifying those projects that do have grant funding and trying to preserve them as best as we can. Certainly there are other higher priorities, one being internet, which we've talked about a great deal. And I believe at this coming Monday night's meeting, we're going to talk about watershed erosion. And so obviously, if it's the choice of the committee not to proceed forward, it'd be a great time to let the department know. That way we can get back to the Municipal Park Grant Commission, advise them that we're not going to proceed forward with the design and engineering, and that the money should be reallocated to a community that can put it to good use in a quicker period of time.
So can I just ask a follow-up? So
Sure, go ahead.
If we get that grant money and then say the improvements just take longer to complete or whatever, or, you know, because of the budget, but we're still committed to doing it, but that's would not be acceptable for the grant.
I wouldn't say it necessarily would be unacceptable. Old Pond School was funded through the Municipal Park Grant Commission, and that took like almost 2.5 years, and we were well beyond the grant deadline. And the board that oversees the Municipal Park Grant Commission, I should say the board members on the Municipal Park Grant Commission, were very accommodating to the city, and they allowed us to carry forward until we completed the project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Steve, I got you, but Deborah had her hand up first, unless your comment was about regarding that, or you want to just, can you wait till Deborah?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, so Joe, we can also have a budget adjustment during the year. We do that, what, twice a year? So that some of the funding, just like we redirected some of the funding for watershed erosion, some other funding could then be directed towards this project as well. And what kind of impact does it have on the city to have this grant opportunity, and then for us to say, no, thank you, we wish not to participate at this time?
Well, I can't speak for the Municipal Park Grant Commission and its members, but certainly, as I say, if there's not support on this committee for the project, then certainly we should not proceed forward and even spend any more time on it, and reallocate that $75,000 to internet or watershed erosion or whatever source the city council should choose. Again, the department's not forcing the project on you. It's not its intent, but we followed the process. We followed as received approval for the resolution to proceed forward with the application. It was awarded, and we've identified it as part of the strategic planning process. So again, it's really your call. I just don't want to proceed forward if we're not going to fund it.
Mr. Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to clarify what I said and reinforce what Mr. Vunich said with regards to the strategic plan and so forth. And he is absolutely right. We have over a period of several weeks into months developed a spreadsheet, a pretty comprehensive, a pretty detailed spreadsheet about all the various projects and priorities that you all, as part of the overall council, identified as the top priorities. And in addition to that, that spreadsheet does identify, as Mr. Vunich correctly pointed out, at your all's request, the council's request, those projects that had monies that are already committed, that have been spent, the amount of those dollars, as well as any dollars where there was some funding. And that gave visibility to the council of any projects that, if they walked away from, be it the shared use path or any other project, what monies they may be leaving on the table. So Mr. Vunich is absolutely correct. So when I indicated that it was not a high priority in the overall scheme of not only the 8 major goals, but then the sub goals. But yes, this is a project where there is some grant money that's available that potentially you as a committee and the council as a whole, because it's not my decision, it's not Mr. Vunich's decision. The council will decide how you want to spend the monies, whatever monies we have, either through a grant or through federal funds, through the American Recovery Plan Act or the infrastructure bill that's coming down the line, various sources. But ultimately, it'd be up to the council to decide truly what is where you want to spend the dollars that we have. So he's right. There's that, this was identified as having monies attached to it that you all would ultimately make the decision, because there'll be additional monies that will need to come from some source to get up to that $750,000, if in fact that is the final bid from TerraSpec.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Does anybody else have any? Joe Farmer, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm a big fan of our priority list that we've got, and I'm also a big fan of the list that we have where we're able to pull different sources of funding in. I mean, I think you know, one of the things that we need to be sure that we are able to do as we go through this, I guess for lack of a better way of saying it, is walk and chew gum at the same time. We've got some big things that we need to get solved. We're doing that. We did that last time on internet. Probably on Monday, we're going to talk about the watershed. Those are some of our big priorities. But I don't have any problem making a motion to, you know, kind of push the ball forward here. If it's going to wind up going to the wider council as a whole anyways, and we can kind of decide at that point where we want to go. But I mean, we've invested a great deal of, certainly I'm sure, man hours and finances in getting this thing going. It seems sort of silly to slam on the brakes at this point, especially if, you know, this group has been very accommodating in the past. Not that that'll be the case this time necessarily. If this project takes a little longer than we might have hoped to get done in the first place, I think we can do these things all kind of simultaneously together. So I will make the motion to, you know, seek some better details from these guys.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Mr. Cruz, we have a motion. We have a second from Councilmember Rambo. Is there any other comments or any other discussion on this? And I kind of agree with what Councilmember Farmer said. I think it's a little bit too early to, you know, so-called kill this. And I know that might be a strong word, but I think we do need to see what we can come back with. So if there's no other comments, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed?
Opposed?
Opposed. Councilmember Clark opposed. Any abstain? Okay, thank you, everyone. So the next item under Parks Matters is the development of a hardcore system in an existing city park property, Ward 1 and 6. Joe, are you taking this one also?
Yes, sir. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing me talk, but
No, not at all.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, Mr. Garitano, as part of public participation tonight, did a nice kickoff for this particular topic on tonight's agenda. Many council people over the course of the last year or more have talked about a hard court surface area in one of our parks to accommodate primarily the item that we hear a lot about, pickleball, but also basketball, tennis, and other sports that might benefit from a hard court surface or surfaces. The Administration Public Works Committee took this up last week at the urging of Councilmember Flasher, and they had a lengthy discussion about it. Mr. Cross was a participant in that, and if you wouldn't mind just kind of summarizing what his feelings were from that meeting, I'd sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I'd be happy to. I think the long and short of it is there, and as Mr. Garitano alluded to during public participation, there's a lot of support not only from the Administration and Public Works Committee to look into how we might put in some hard surfaces in the appropriate areas within the city. There's a lot of resident feedback, and that caused Mr. Flasher then to bring it to the admin PW committee. So there it moved out of that, it didn't move out of that committee, but certainly there was wide support for looking into it, find out what parks or areas within the city would accommodate those kinds of services. And I think Mr. Vunich, probably in his memorandum here, identifies a couple areas that would work. So it's something that started at admin PW and has good traction from that committee anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions or comments? Deborah?
Yeah, it's just more of a comment. I think that was one of the original plans that was supposed to go in the community park when the community park was first initiated. And I have heard a lot of residents from all the wards who are interested in having some kind of hard court surface, especially hear a lot now about pickleball, but for a long time it was about basketball courts. So I certainly support this.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So at this point, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Oh, my apologies. No, as the chair, I defer. My apologies.
So at this point, we're looking for areas, correct? Like just see where this would kind of like some kind of like prospective areas for hardcore surfaces, correct? Not necessarily limited to these two. We could have other ones as well that might work also, correct?
Certainly, the idea is, and maybe just to give a bit of background before I answer your question, Mr. Chair. At the beginning of this year, the department identified 7 projects that it consistently hears about from either council people, our appointed officials on our boards and commissions, or residents that call. At the top of that list was a hardcore area. And the reason that list was formulated by the department, beyond just the input, was that generally speaking, they're smaller projects. They're easier to kind of initiate. And certainly in terms of funding, don't have the 7-figure numbers associated with them, or even the high 6-figure numbers associated with them. The Edmond Public Works Committee kind of took this ball and ran with it, no pun intended. And from the perspective of the department, it was asked by a couple of the council people, where would a good location be? Ms. McCutcheon identified the first location, Community Park, because it was part of the overall master plan at one time. And then secondly, there's the area down in Glencoe, which is part of Wildwood. The issue that the department would like to explore and would appreciate direction from the committee is that the charter says that we cannot spend more than 3.5 on a particular project. Given the phases we've done in Community Park, we have bumped up against that $3.5 million number and gone over a little. And so that may be a determinant. We may need to go to a vote to even build a hard court surface in Community Park. If that were to be the case and the council still wanted to expedite the development of a hard court area, then the Glencoe area would be the next location I think we should consider. It's flat, it has a great amount of already visitors to it for the trail system. But I guess the first step in all of this is to consult with the city attorney, make a determination of that, come back to the committee with that determination. And then if it's favorable there or elsewhere, to engage a park designer to help us understand what we can and can't do. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I agree with Deborah. I think Community Park would be ideal, but it just might not be feasible. And I had never heard of pickleball till she actually mentioned it like 4 or 5 years ago. And now that's all you hear about. But just as an alternative, Joe, another area that I would like to maybe if we could explore is I think the city owns the property across from Anniversary Park. It's very residential heavy. A lot of people would be able to walk to it. I don't know if it's going to be flat enough or how realistic it would be, but it would be more residents would be able to walk or ride a bike to it than the other areas. So I saw Mr. Cross and I think I saw Councilmember Rambo. I don't remember which one was first, but I'll just go with Councilmember Rambo.
Okay, that's fine. Sure. I fully support this concept. I would suggest that we consider the possibility of expansion from the get-go. And one of the things that Dan Fleischer mentioned today in an email was lighting. And I hadn't really considered that. I'm just thinking, man, you got a flat spot, you can, pour some concrete or asphalt or whatever and put up some fences and you're done, but it's not quite that simple. So we have to, consider that possibility because I think this will really be popular and it would be, there are all kinds, Dan was talking about leagues and all those kinds of things that, you can eventually get going. So I think we need to make sure that we have adequate real estate. I'm disappointed to hear that we might not be able to put it in Community Park because I think that's the ideal place for it. But the reason I really raised my hand was to suggest that we also consider volleyball, sand volleyball. It's really, everybody loves volleyball. We have all these pavilions. It's one more thing for families to do when they're renting the pavilions and recreating and so on and so forth. And it's there are quite a few sand volleyball courts around in the in surrounding areas. I've never been. I can't dribble a basketball. I'm not very good at volleyball, those kinds of things. So I've never played it a lot, but a lot of people really love it. The schools are volleyball is really booming in the schools, and a lot of the kids, like my next door neighbor, all three of his daughters are volleyball crazy. And so I think that would be helpful and be really cheap. And so maybe we can put the volleyball courts in Community Park because it is so cheap, and consider the hard surface courts elsewhere. So that's really more just of a suggestion as Mr. Vunich goes through the planning. That's it. I fully support this effort.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. I have you, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Community Park. There is a lot of support for Community Park. That seems to be the #1 location that people would like to see. I am working with City Attorney Young. The issue, we discussed it at the last council meeting as it relates to internet. You all may recall when I talked about the potential dollar amount that internet might cost the city, and then being offset by some federal funds and other things. The $3.5 million cap may in fact be a little bit higher than that, perhaps enough to cover the cost of putting in some hard surface courts. And the reason I say that is that, and Mr. Young is looking into the legislation, but it's his understanding, and as he has told me, there is an inflation factor built in. So the $3.5 million at 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whenever that was passed, could be 3.75 million now, based on compounding of inflation factors. So there is a possibility, and I haven't seen the numbers yet or gotten into it further with Mr. Young, but it doesn't seem like it's a hard cap at 3.5 million, because there's some language in there that allows that number to go up according to inflation. So it's not a lost cause, as I understand it, in Community Park.
Thank you, Teresa. And Deborah, I got you next.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm a naysayer today, but I just don't know about bringing something else in before we have our top priorities covered with budget. Where does this fit in? Where is this going to come about after we pay for everything on our priority list, or are we changing the priority list and sticking this in somewhere?
Deborah?
Teresa, were you asking was that a question directed at somebody?
That was a question to Steve or Joe.
I'll go ahead and take a shot at it. That's for the council to decide, Ms. Clark. These courts, hard surface courts, Joe, but maybe they were part of the 2021 budget, or some, you alluded to, these are kind of quick hits, a little, not a lot of money. So I'm not sure if it's in your 21 budget, 2021, or in a 5-year plan, just as something to look at. But Ms. Clark, as far as priorities, no, this was not identified specifically as a priority. So ultimately, all these things we're talking about, you're discussing it at the committee level, but ultimately it will go to council. And as you all know, there are members of council that are very, very, only want to spend dollars on certain things, and stick with what we have as a 5-year plan. and what our 8 priorities are. So this might be a change to that, and that would be a discussion at the council level.
Deborah, did you have something you wanted to say also?
No, so Steve and Joe, what's the possibility of us getting a grant someplace to accomplish this particular project? And are we for sure putting something on the November ballot? Because if we are, this could be included as well.
Well, as far as putting something on the November ballot, the only thing we have we've discussed a parks and stormwater tax, but at not the last council meeting, but the one prior to that, I believe, that was postponed or deferred for 90 days. So that will come back, I guess, in August, I think, back to council to decide if we're going to put something on the November ballot for a parks and stormwater tax. If that comes back in August, that does not leave us a lot of time to develop the materials and everything we need to put a ballot measure on the November ballot. But right now it was postponed for 90 days.
I think that part of the reason it was postponed was to look into the possibility of purchasing bonds for the erosion issues.
Well, that is one of the funding sources. Again, we're looking at multiple sources of funds for multiple projects. Right now, we spent, a big chunk of the work session last council meeting and figuring out what we want to do with internet. And as the mayor said, at the conclusion of that was we would have the same discussion this coming Monday with regards to Watershed and Lake Chesterfield. He must not be anticipating quite the length of discussion since the work session starts at 6 o'clock Monday rather than 5 o'clock. So it's starting at the normal time this coming Monday. So we'll discuss that and perhaps other issues. So, there's a lot of balls in the air right now. We haven't gone down the road in terms of looking at a NID or bonds or a parks and stormwater tax. Those things take time. It's very likely that in the April 2022 ballot, it's almost a certainty now that Wayfair passed last Friday. So we will have a Wayfair use tax referendum on the ballot in April of 2022. So we want to be careful that we don't load things up. So lots of things for the council to consider in terms of where all this funding is going to come from. We're going to get roughly half of our $6.5 million soon, hopefully, depending on what Governor Parson decides he wants to do with that money. And we'll get half of it now and half of it 12 months from now. So the council can decide what they want to do with that other $3.25 million 12 months from now.
And Joe, the
Councilmember
possibility,
Galani. Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah, if you had a follow-up, go ahead.
yeah, and Joe, the possibility of a grant, is there a resource that you think might apply to this?
Ms. McCutcheon, we can certainly apply again this year to the Municipal Park Grant Commission for a hard court surface area. Other communities have applied for similar facilities and been successful. And so just to ensure that the committee is clear, the department again has Bluffview Park as one of the items it wants to fund in the near term. Other than that, the only other park project that's on the horizon is Village Green. And in that particular case, the council, after it purchased the 6 acres west of City Hall, was adamant about proceeding forward as quickly as possible with some type of development of that property. So for the long term, other than those 2 projects, Bluffview and Village Green, there's really nothing on the horizon, and that's directly tied into the City Council's direction in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Galani.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say that I support us taking a look and pursuing the hard court surface initiative that Councilmember Flasher has kind of brought to everyone's attention. I also want to say I agree with Councilmember Farmers analogy that we can kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. We've got these priority lists for our strategic plan that we've discussed, and we've got our big dogs, the internet and the watershed, and then those guys that are going to need the allocation of millions of dollars, and they're big projects that are going to be worked on over the course of years. And I think we just allocated, was it 6.5 million to the internet in the last council meeting out of the funds we were getting from the federal COVID and all that. And I think part of it was coming from the reserves. And I think that, the 10 million that was the high end of the internet was over the course of 10 years. It wasn't something that was going to be due in a year or two. So my point being is that I think that we can pursue some of these other smaller projects at the same time that we're also making sure that we're staying true to making sure that internet that gets done and gets taken care of. And we are working on Watershed as well. So I think in Wildwood, we pride ourselves on being recreational and having access for our residents for trails and the ability to enjoy the nature characteristics. And so a lot of folks like to be outside, and I think it is kind of a troublesome thing that we don't have any hard courts anywhere in the city. I regularly go to Bluebird Park in Ellisville to play tennis because it's the closest place for me to go in the summertime. And there's only a few courts there, and they're typically booked unless you go at inopportune times. So anyway, I think it's something that our residents would thoroughly enjoy, and I don't think there would be any pushback from any corners of the city as far as spending a few $100,000 or whatever it's going to take to get those put in there. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, just real quickly, I agree with Mr. Galani. I hate the idea of a bunch of old geezers getting together and saying, no, we can't afford these hard surface courts because we need to pay for some mundane pedestrian nonsense. And so something for the young folks is a great idea to me. And I was just doing some mental calculations, and a tennis court, including some overlap, and basketball surface about 50 by 100. And if you multiply that out and divide by the square footage of a yard of concrete, we're talking, for materials, probably 10 grand for the tennis and maybe 18 for the basketball, plus the fencing and plus the striping and the nets and the this and that. And the money will add up, but we could get a nice facility with a couple of tennis courts and a basketball court for, the kind of money we're talking about, $100K, as long as we're careful to locate it where we can get power to it later, because we don't have to build everything at once. Maybe we start out with one court and see how it goes or something. But I'd really like to see this go forward. So I just jumped in to express my support again, since Dan's not here.
Thank you. So I don't see anybody else's hand up right now. Joe, what are you looking for from us tonight?
Again, I was asking for authorization to engage the city attorney and make the determination regarding community park. Mr. Cross says that's already underway. And once we make that determination, the department would like to come back and offer at least 3 locations from what I heard tonight for potential, being community park if we can. Second would be the Anniversary Park, Woodcliff Heights Park area, and then finally Glencoe.
Okay, Rob, are you making that motion?
Yes, I'm making that motion.
Okay, do we have a second? We have a second from Councilmember Galani. Is there any other discussion on that? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Could you repeat the motion one more time?
Sure, go ahead, Gary. Oh, you are muted. You are muted.
Motion to engage the city attorney to research the possibility of using community park for the hard courts without going to the city for a vote.
Okay, so this isn't a motion to proceed with this project. It's just to check about the city Okay,
Correct.
then yes.
Then yes, okay. Is there anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Okay, motion passes. Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda under Park Matters is the event partnership agreement for Wildwood Movie Night. And I guess we should kind of remember Councilmember Remy. He was a big proponent of this. So Joe?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, a group of businesses in the city of Wildwood's town center area is interested in hosting 2 movie nights, a drive-in version of movie nights here in town center. The 3 entities are Anthology, the senior care facility just to the northeast of City Hall, Mike Sedlak, who owns a insurance company, and 2 real estate agents with Berkshire Hathaway. These 3 entities provided 2 movies last year, and they were very successful during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they'd like to do it again this year. The location would be the field east of the B&B Theater, and as part of their request, they are asking the city to consider some assistance. In this particular case, 2 police officers and a mobile lighting facility. So as when the drive-in movie concludes, there's better light at the access and exit point out onto Main Street. The entity has completed the required agreement, and tonight is being presented to you with a favorable recommendation from the department. To request a motion to support such so it can be forwarded on to the city council for final consideration and action.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Councilmember Clark?
I move that we approve this tonight to go ahead as written.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second? We have a second from Councilmember Nyans. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Next thing we have on our agenda is the virtual recreation program update.
Mr. Chair, the next 2 items are generally just for information. If there are any questions of Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cruz, or I, we'd be glad to answer them regarding the virtual programming or the expenditures, registrations, and et cetera relating to the park system.
Anybody have any questions or anything for Joe? For Travis? Okay. Seeing that, we have no executive session scheduled. Other matters for consideration, update on the pedestrian bridge. Joe, did you have something you wanted to share with us on that?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the department conducted a pre-construction meeting at the location of the pedestrian bridge this past Friday. And as nature would have it, one side where the bridge would originate or end versus the other side where it would originate or end are not level. And to accommodate that, the plans have been developed that allowed the trail to meander a bit to compensate for grade and maintain ADA accessibility. What that all equates to is a very nice large grand tree needs to be removed. Is something that was shown on the plan sheets, but when visiting the site, the tree is a very nice tree. So I just wanted to advise you of that, and we're looking at adding some additional landscaping according to our regulations to offset the removal of the tree. There'll be more to follow as we get into this over the course of the next couple of weeks. But I just wanted to give you a heads up on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have anything they want to add? Rob, go ahead, Rob.
I'm just curious, Joe, how can we go see that? I'm not sure exactly if there's a street address associated or I'm not sure where we're talking.
when I get in tomorrow morning, Dr. Rambo, I'll send you a little map to all of you that shows you the location so you can take a look at the tree.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Mr. Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe, I'm sure you thought about this, but is there any way to move the bridge one way or the other so that the grand tree does not have to be removed? If it's the end of the trail, can there be a little diversion or something to save from doing that?
I did ask that question. I didn't get the answer I was hoping, Mr. Cross. To kind of shift the trail so the bridge would be at a 5% or less slope, it would require the installation of a pretty substantial set of retaining walls on the manors at the enclave side of the trail system. And then it would require the path to be reconstructed and taper a pretty substantial distance to the north. At least that's what was explained to me by the selected contractor and the park designer. I'm still thinking about it, but like I say, it's just, the tree didn't look that good the last time I was out there, but it was late in the fall. Now it's spring and boy, it sure has come back and looks good.
What country is it, Joe?
Tree, Joe?
Oh, I'd say at the diameter breast height, at least 30 inches, if not a little bit more. So it's a nice.
What species is it, Joe?
I want to say
Yeah.
when I asked that, it was like a shagbark or something. Shagbark.
Oh man, yeah, that's a very old tree if it's 30-inch shagbark hickory. Yeah, but there are a lot of. I assume this is like some sort of prefab bridge we're going to order or something.
It's stick built.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I mean, there are. Is there a possibility of arching it so that it will come down? It will leave a higher bank and come down to a lower bank. I know you've probably thought about this many times, but I'm trying to save that tree if possible.
I have, but I haven't necessarily proposed that solution or option. So like I say, I'm kind of dragging my feet on the notice to proceed. I have a good excuse. We need to talk to their trustees in both subdivisions, send out some notices to the nearby residents to let them know that there'll be construction activity. So I'm trying to figure out a solution here. So if anybody visits and comes up with an idea, well, I'm all ears.
Thank you.
Teresa?
Yeah, what Steve said gave me a little idea. Can we just build the bridge where the tree comes up through it?
Can certainly, I'll offer that suggestion. I mean, I was hoping the committee would be as concerned about it as I, because I don't want to proceed forward unless all options have been considered. And so anything you can suggest, I have 2 new suggestions now. I'll certainly bring back to the park designer.
Anybody else? Yeah,
I'll take a couple photos tomorrow and text them to people if they want to see it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Rob. It would be very unique to have the tree coming up through the bridge and the walkway. It would actually be a little bit of a landmark and something for people to see. So Deborah, did you have something to add also?
I do, if Joe's finished with, he's talking human nature on the village green side. Are you going to talk about that, Joe?
With the permission of the chair, and thank you
Sure.
for reminding me, Ms. McCutcheon. Mr. Cross and I received the preliminary cost estimate for the master plan for Village Green. And it's really expensive. Really expensive. Did I say really expensive? Yeah. So
Looks like we're all sitting down.
thankfully. So what I asked Human Nature to do is put together a proposal to kind of figure out a way where we could do a limited phase 1 so that the park could be opened sooner than later. And so that additional work would be $4,000. And I checked today with Dawn Kaiser, our finance manager, and we've not exceeded the amount that was originally part of Human Nature's contract. which was $80,000. We're at about $66,000 and nearing conclusion. So I was going to ask the committee to authorize us to just roll that $4,000 into the original contract, if that's acceptable to Mr. Young and Mr. Cross, so that we could at least have an option to open the village green at some point in the near future being a couple of years probably, but the number is a pretty big number. Thank you.
Anybody have anything else they want to comment on? Deborah?
Yeah, so Don, I'm not sure if anybody made you aware, but the chair for the Parks and Planning Committee is also on the Program Budget Committee. So all standing chairs are on that committee as well. So you can join your cohort, Lauren, and then Mr. Garantano on that committee.
Sure. Mr. Cross?
Two things. So with regards to the Program Budget Committee, Mr. Vunich and I are putting together some final documents. And our hope is to reconvene that committee sometime later this month. That's our hope, that with everything else going on, we can get back together and go over the fee schedule and so forth. The other thing I wanted to mention is Mr. Vunich gave you all a great opportunity, and I can't believe that none of you have bitten on that and asked him the question and said, how big is that number?
Yeah, I was waiting.
I said we were sitting down. I thought he would just take that as.
I was waiting for one of he took you to the edge, but he didn't, and so I'm holding back. I'm gonna, since he set it up, I'm gonna let him hit it out of the park.
I will just flat ask, what was the preliminary number? We're all sitting, and Councilmember Farmer's even strapped in.
It's over $12 million.
Whoa.
It's almost a $13 million. But you know what? It shouldn't surprise you when you all have seen the plans and how beautiful that's going to be when it's all done. I mean, at the end of the day, yes. I mean, I choked a little bit, but then I really wasn't surprised. And we won't spend it all up front, but when that is done, that is the focal point of the city, no question about it. But it's a $13 million hit in today's dollars.
Larry said we could take it from internet.
Yeah. You go ahead and present that to him, Mr. Kalani.
Yeah.
I'm not touching that one.
Does anybody else have anything else they want to add? Okay, great meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Farmer. Seconded by Councilmember Galani, non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Thank you, staff. Great meeting, everybody. And we'll see you Monday.
Good night, everyone.